Okay, so this is the session, Continuing Professional Development, CPD, the first 3 years. We're going to be jumping around a little bit, and we're going to start off with Joe. And Joe is our reasonably new Head of Registration and Advice at Social Work England. So it'll be quite nice to hear how he feels in his newer post, how CPD our renewal has been. Then I'm going to do a little bit from a regional engagement point of view around peer reflection, and then we're really pleased that Vicky is joining us. Vicky is works in the northeast, in Stockton, and I went to do a presentation for some of her staff, and they started to talk about the peer reflection sessions that they set up in Stockton. So we thought it'd be really nice just to bring a bit of life and reality about one local authority and what they've done in terms of their peer reflection. And I know there's lots across the country, but it is just really nice to see one example. And then we're going to go to Andrew, who's our CPD Quality Assurance Manager, and he's going to do a bit about the what we've learned over the last 3 years. Then back to Joe, he will round up, and then we'll hear from Laura in terms of her pictorial representation of the session. So it's pretty full on, and we will go to Joe. So over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Catherine. I'd just also like to welcome everybody to the session. It's great to see so many people attending so late in the evening. As Catherine alluded to, we see CPD as being an embedded and a valued part of the profession. So I just want to talk a little bit about Social Work England's role and what it means to be regulated. So Social Work England's primary role is protection of the public, and our purpose is to regulate social workers so that people receive the best possible support whenever they may need it. This means that we need to make sure that the right people are using the protected title of social work. It's our responsibility to make sure that everyone on the register is fit to practice, and evidence in CPD is an essential part of demonstrating your fitness to practice as a social worker. So what does it mean to be regulated? So firstly, it provides specialist standards which social workers are expected to uphold. We have six professional standards in total, and standard 4 specifically focuses on CPD. And meeting our CPD requirements is a mandatory requirement to maintain your registration. It's therefore an essential part of professional life as a social worker. Secondly, regulating the profession maintains public confidence and trust. And by completing and recording CPD, you demonstrate to us, and more importantly, the public, that you continue to meet professional standard 4, that you continue to be fit to practice as a social worker, and also it demonstrates updating of skills and knowledge. And then I think most importantly, CPD isn't just about regulatory requirements. It's also an opportunity to improve your practice as a social worker, further develop skills and understanding, and it also helps to ensure that practice remains up to date. And finally, we have a minimum requirement to evidence CPD. We encourage social workers to record CPD once a quarter as good practice. And this again helps to ensure that you're maintaining your practices up to date, building on them skills and knowledge, and developing further skills and understanding. Thank you. I'll now pass you back over to my colleague Catherine, who will take you through the next part.
Mic not on, of course, and nor is the camera. So thanks ever so much, Joe. Really, you're really important information there. And I do remember when we became Social Work England in 2019, CPD was really central to who we were as a regulator and to Social Work England. But as we all know, in March of the following year, COVID hit. And things changed for everybody, for the profession and for the regulator. And I can remember debates going on about, oh, should we be asking social workers to do CPD at such a stressful time? They're just trying to keep their heads above water. And actually, we took a really firm position on that, and I think it was the right one. And we did consult with the sector, but we felt that CPD was so essential and so critical to who we are as a profession and about keeping the public public safe and keeping our standards high, that we we did hold on to the requirement for CPD. And in fact, in year two, we expanded that requirement to two pieces of CPD rather than one, and a a piece of peer reflection. So really, really important. So it was two pieces in year one as well. So we, it, but it does absolutely show where Social Work England regards CPD as part of our professional registration. So I'm going to do a little bit about the new element, which is the peer reflection, and the regional engagement leads do go around the country. We spend times in our regions, doing sessions about CPD all the way through the year. We've got a lot of national events that people can join up to. And we'll put some of the links in those in at the end of the session. And we have, in fact, developed a program of peer reflection as well. So we've got a series of peer reflection sessions that will run right up to September, and hopefully within the new renewal period. And they have been exceptionally successful in term, not just for the social workers that have attended them, but also for the social workers in Social Work England that facilitate them, because we meet a very different and diverse range of social workers from all sorts of backgrounds, where we talk about a professional part of our professional standards, and have been really, really successful. So I'd urge you to have a think about attending one of those if you haven't got ready access to a peer, or you just want to meet somebody different, which I think there is a lot of learning that can come out of that, where you reflect with somebody in a completely different area of social work. So, as I say, the requirements are a minimum of two pieces, which has always been. But this year we asked for a piece of peer reflection. And at this point, I want to stress that we had a little bit of confusion when we've looked at it, what has been produced, that some social workers thought peer reflection was CPD, and got a little bit confused and tied up with that. CPD is the learning activity, and the peer reflection is discussing that learning activity. So you wouldn't class a piece of CPD as peer reflection. It is the learning that you discuss with that peer that turns it into the peer reflection. And it is the area that causes the most anxiety, and that we would get the most contacts about, people really worrying about their peer reflection. And we hope that through our national sessions and talking to people and going to our regions, that we can actually sort of dispel that myth, because actually you do peer reflection on a daily basis, in terms of talking to your colleagues, in your supervision, in a team meeting. There is so many opportunities to capture that peer reflection, and I'll say a little bit more about that. We've just identified a few scenarios for you to think about. The deadline hasn't changed. It is always the 30th of November. Social Work England was born on the 1st of December, so that's why our regulation year runs. It doesn't follow a financial year or a lumen, or whatever it is, ordinary year. We have our own social work a year, which starts in the 1st of December. Uh, and you have to provide your CPD as part of your renewal. There is no there is no extenuating circumstances. CPD must be provided as part of your regulatory requirements, and the doors shut at midnight on the 30th. You can't add it, the following day. And as Joe said, and it was said very quickly, but 4 times a year is really what you should be aiming for. That's once a quarter, and because it is about learning and development, and not about just meeting the regulatory requirements, once every quarter is exactly what we would be expecting most social workers to be doing. So peer reflection, as I say, people got their sort of got their got a bit stressy about what that might be, and we have given quite a lot of detail on our website about what a peer and who a peer is, and it's not exhaustive because peers come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, but it will be somebody who has knowledge of your practice and that is somebody that you're not sort of providing support to. So it could be another social worker, it could be your line manager, or another professional from a completely different uh, working profession. For it could be a police officer, it could be a mental health worker, somebody that would know your practice and would know what your social work involves. But there's lots of advice on our website. And when you do your peer reflection is you actually talk to people about what you've learned from doing the CPD and the impact it's had on your practice. And that's the bit that we really want to see, its impact on practice. When people get advice when their CPD hasn't met the requirements, it is generally because they've described their CPD and they haven't told us how it's impacted on practice. So my advice to you is ditch the narrative. We don't need to know every single detail about what the course involved and the certificate and the what we want to know is how it's impacted on your practice. What are you going to do differently? What are you thinking about differently? How are you going to see that? How are people that you work with going to feel that? And it can be something small or it can be a very big thing. And it's about what you believe has impacted on your practice. And we're not asking you for the name of your peer, and we actually just we say we don't want to know that the person's name because it needs to be confidential. So no identifying features in that recording. So I'm going to really fly through these. You're going to get the slides. I'm just checking on the time, so I need to speedy up a little bit. Um, you can have a look at these at your own leisure. So scenario one, and you will look at these and think, yeah, of course I'll do that. Chat with a colleague in terms of that could be back from a home visit. It could be you've had a really difficult engagement with somebody. It could be writing a report. Have those conversations. I've been a social worker for 30 years and I hear them day in, day out. The open door policies of managers, discussing with colleagues what they've done and how you might do things differently. Feedback and supervision, a big thing of me for me is that supervision doesn't feature very much in our what we see supplied as CPD records. Please think about CPD supervision as an opportunity to do CPD. Yeah, to do your CPD. Uh, and I know some supervisions are about, managing caseloads, having checking everything, but there will be some reflective times and there will be opportunities for you to reflect with your manager. So good supervision is a really good example of CPD. Sharing whilst not practicing. So lots of people worry about peer reflection when they're not practicing. There is opportunities in terms of, accessing things like our national events, but there's also things like BASWA and Skills for Care, CQC. There's lots of opportunities there that you can sort of tap into if you're struggling in terms of um, discussing your CPD with a peer. Learning from a book, that's another really good opportunity. It doesn't have to be anything that is discussed sort of in a group. You could go on to look at a podcast, you could read something, research and practice, lots of opportunities there for CPD. And participation in an event. So today, you could use this as an opportunity, or any of the events at Social Work England as CPD opportunities. So that was a wee bit quick at the end. I'm going to hand over to Vicky, because Vicky is living and breathing CPD in Stockton, and I'm going to go there on Friday. I'm really excited and meet all the social workers there. But she's going to just spend a few minutes just to tell you how she's managed CPD within Stockton Borough Council. So thanks, Vicky.
Lovely, thank you, Catherine. First of all, just to say a big thank you for being invited to come along today, and to talk through some of the work that we do in Stockton Borough Council in terms of peer reflection. Are the slides on the screen?
Oh, have
Can
you
I
not?
just check?
Oh, sorry. Just go back to sharing. I think you got them.
Fab,
Yeah.
brilliant, thank you. So yeah, as Catherine's said, I'm aware that peer reflection in a variety of forms is taking place in a number of different areas, different authorities, and different organisations. I've been invited to come along today just to talk about our experience and what we do in Stockton-on-Tees Borough Council in our adult services. So. First of all, just to give you a little bit of context and a bit of background to what we do. So, as we've touched on already, the term peer reflection did initially it did bring some concerns to staff, thinking that it was actually quite a big task, time consuming, and on the back of that, our adult principal social worker launched the peer reflection sessions, and these are structured, they're in the diary, these invites are sent out. So they initially started as we were coming out the back end of some of the COVID restrictions that we had in place. So they were initially on Teams, and they were all remote. And at that point, that was seen as the most appropriate format. Now that things have changed in terms of our work and practice, we now have them set up in the diary, in a central location, and staff are invited. The invites get sent out, and they're invited to come along. Now, the sessions are for 2 hours, and I will expand a little bit on what we do within the sessions, but we've always been quite clear that there is no expectations regarding an agenda or itinerary to the discussions. The expectation is it's a drop in, it's informal, staff can turn up if and when they want to, and we discuss matters that may be pressing on their mind on that particular time. And I think it's really important that we have that flexibility, because then it allows staff to think that they can just come along, and there will be opportunities to have discussions and seek support and guidance from colleagues within that. The other aspect to that is we don't know who's going to be there on the day. We don't know the skill set that's going to be in the room, and the in terms of roles and responsibilities. So that's also an aspect of it that can affect the conversations that take place. But by and large, it's heavily attended. We get a good turnout. They take place every month, and as I said, we try and keep a clear structure in terms of making sure that we support staff to reflect on their practice, and as well as have a clear reference and link to Social Work England registration. So just to try and give you a little bit of an overview of the structure of the sessions. So I suppose we could probably break it down to 3 individual stages. So the first part of it is we encourage staff to come along. It's attended by social workers, social care officers. We don't limit it to qualified staff, because we recognise that staff that aren't necessarily there for their registration purposes are still going to benefit from the conversations, and have certainly still got aspects of their work that they will benefit from discussing as well. So it's very inclusive, and the invites are sent out. But the first part of it, I suppose, in the first stage, is about asking staff if they've got anything they want to talk about. And sometimes it can be it can be particular case matters, it can be concerns or issues that they're having with a particular uh, aspect of a case management, or it could be working with an organisation. It can be broad, but what we tend to do is we encourage people to volunteer discussions and to talk about something that they may be struggling with a little bit. And then the next part of that is, once we've had those conversations, and they tend to flow quite easily within the room, there's a lot of people ad-libbing and joining in on different parts of that. But once we've done that, we then kind of take stock and then reflect on the conversations that we've had. So it may be then, you know, saying to somebody, all right, well, you brought this today, we've had a discussion. How do you feel like you know, on the balance of the information that's been discussed, the suggestions or the signposting information that's been provided by colleagues? How are you feeling now? Do you feel um, that, you know, more calm, more happy with what you're going to do? Is it more clear? Have you got any actions in mind that on the back of the discussions and the advice that's been shared within the room? And then quite often they will say, well, you know, I was a bit concerned. Thank you for, you know, any information or any kind of advice and guidance that's been provided. Or they might say, right, on the back of this, after I've finished here, I'm going to go away and do X, Y, and Z. But 9 times out of 10, what we try to do is offer reassurance that, you know, what they've done is the right thing. If, you know, if anybody's got any suggestions on what somebody or what they wouldn't have done. And again, it's a very positive environment. It's a very supportive environment. And it is all, you know, generally trying to just support somebody to navigate through a situation that they may be struggling with within their practice. And then lastly, the final stage of what we do is we actively encourage staff to bring their laptops with them. We allocate time at the end for people to log on to their Social Work England account to actually record the peer reflection. Now, that'll be an individual situation, because depending on what people have spoken about, depending on how they've contributed to the conversations, and what they've taken out of that from a reflection point of view. But we encourage staff to use an allocated amount of time to do that. It's probably also worth saying we recommend that they leave them in draft. We don't save them in that forum, because we also recognise that the car journey back to the office or later on throughout the day, they may have further reflections. So it's not an isolated, it's not time limited. It's very much about thinking about the conversations, what they do on reflection. You know, because obviously in that room, they may feel like there's an action to do, but then obviously greater time to think about their practice and what on the balance of the information they might choose to do something different. And again, I think that's an important element to document and reflect on. And I think quite often um, people don't necessarily recognise what they've done in terms of recording the CPD. So I won't go through all of the standard, the 4.1, 4.2, and what are on the slide. But quite often the conversations that we have will take into consideration, and obviously it's all anonymous, that we don't share sensitive data about the individuals that we're talking about, but they may say, oh, the nurse has said this, or the CPN has said this. So that fits nicely into 4.1, because our conversations will also take into consideration those sources and what they've said, and, you know, weighing up the information that we've got. So what we try to do is, within that 2-hour timescale, allow people the opportunities to, first of all, bring the conversations into the room, prioritise matters that they want to do, and then allow that reflection time as a group, and think about, oh, you've said this, that was really good, and offer that you know, peer support as well, and help people you know, figure out what the right, you know, what the right thing to do. And then the last element of that is the recording part of it, which we obviously encourage staff to make a start on, and save it in draft, just to allow that freedom to obviously at a later point to reflect a little bit more. So I'll just move on to the next slide. Thank you. So I mean, these are very broad, but these are just some of the observations we've made, because obviously we've reflected on the peer reflection sessions, what's working, try to amend and tweak things wherever we can. And in general, these are some of these are some of the things that we've been able to pick from them. I won't read them all out, and obviously the slides will be circulated afterwards. But by and large, I think it's important just to emphasise that, you know, there's been a lot of freedom for staff. We recognise they manage their own diaries. They can prioritise whether or not they want to come along to the sessions. As I said, they're in a rolling diary. They're every month. So depending on people's priorities, they can come along as and when they feel like. Equally, some people will turn up midway through because they've been caught up on a telephone call or in a meeting, and that's absolutely fine. We actively encourage staff to not feel like they have to be there at a set time and necessarily stay for the full duration. It's about the quality of the discussions. It's not about clock watching, thinking about, it's about the value of the conversations that we generate within the time that people come along and get involved with that. But broadly speaking, it's supported as a community, as a social work community within our organisation, because there's staff attending from a range of different services, different teams, and the benefit of that is they're able to pull information and knowledge and skill sets from different areas. They're able to become aware of particular services and providers and things that may have been limited to an extent in terms of knowledge for certain aspects of the teams that we have. So I think it's pulled us all together. There's a really positive community from that, and also it allows us to support staff to do their CPD in a timely manner. Now, we will, there are times of the year where we do notice, extremely busy sessions, particularly autumn time as everybody's getting ready for their re-registering, and that's absolutely acceptable and expected. But again, we promote people coming all year round, and we recognise that there's certainly some health and well-being benefits of doing your peer reflections quite early on in the year. There's nothing saying that you only have to do the one. We actually encourage staff to, if they've attended the sessions, to document them, and then there's a variety of different scenarios that are listed within there. As Catherine's advised, you don't necessarily need to do that in that forum. There are other opportunities for peer reflection to be taken place, but we want staff to engage with these sessions, see the benefits of having that forum, and like I say, using it to their advantage so that they're able to complete their registration requirements in a timely manner. But also it supports us as an organisation to be confident that we're on track and we're getting everything done that we need to do. So the next slide is these are just a few quotes that over the last, certainly over the last year or so, that we've had from staff. And as you can see there, there's a broad amount of feedback, and I just to pull out a few there. We quite clear it doesn't replace your line management supervision, and as Catherine's advised, ordinarily supervision should incorporate case reflection. We recognise sometimes supervision can feel more like case management. It can feel like very task orientated, and come away with action plans and to-do lists and things like that. But these sessions that we provide are a top up. It's an enhancement. It's allowing another forum in addition to supervision. And then, like, lastly, people advising that they can do this in works time and not feel the pressure. A lot of the time staff can feel that, and they do advisors in feedback sessions and things that, the benefits of doing this in works time is they've got colleagues there to support them doing it, encouraging them to do it, and then that sense of relief that they've been able to do that, and they will do more throughout the year, but at least that they're making a start. And then gradually through the sessions, the term peer reflection doesn't seem overly daunting. It's more of it's viewed as a supportive system, and certainly an additional opportunity to reflect on what we do, why we do it, and offer those learning opportunities, as I say, within us as an organisation. So I recognise that this is something that we do that works for us. And there'll be other models and other methods that are taking place within other organisations. But as I say, it's just to come along today, just to kind of share what we've learned from doing this, and there may be some elements of it that are already taking place, or there might be some aspects of what I've discussed that you think actually we could do that or do it a little bit differently. But I'm pleased to be able to come along today and just share a little bit about what we've done, because I think it does work well for us. And certainly the feedback that we have from staff is overall very positive about our peer reflection sessions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicky. That's been, I think it was brilliantly described and almost in its simplicity. And the thing that really struck me is that it's about the unintended positive outcomes. So you're actually changing culture and changing how people think about CPD, which is exactly what Social Work England want. It isn't about just renewing your registration. It's about a whole cultural change and behavioral change. So you really are driving that forward. And the other thing, just very quickly before we come on to Andrew, is I noticed in the slide before was that the presence of senior managers has really impacted, and I think that's something that we might need to think about in terms of pushing a bit more, maybe from Social Work England's point of view, is that really does change culture, and that modelling is really, really important as
Yeah.
well. So and actually some senior managers, their CPD may not be of the
Yeah.
best.
Well,
So,
yeah. I mean, that's something that we do recognise, that our senior managers are also social workers, and
absolutely.
they come along to talk in that setting as social workers as
Yeah,
well, and it's important to allow that safe space and those conversations to take place. But definitely we have a high percentage of our senior managers at our reflection sessions, and I think that helps staff to prioritize the sessions, because you know, leading by example.
perfect. So thank you so
Thank you.
much, and thanks for your time. And I'll see you on Friday.
Thank
So,
you.
right, we're going to move to Andrew. So welcome, Andrew, and I will move this. I'll go off camera.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Vicky. And before I get to my presentation, I'll just pick up on one thing that Vicky was talking about, peer reflection and it being a supportive process. And one of the reasons why Social Work England introduced the peer reflection element of CPD was to be a supportive process. We did some research in, I think it was 2020, we did some research on attitudes to CPD amongst the social work profession. And one of the things that social workers told us was that they often didn't feel supported in the workplace with their CPD. So we brought this element in to provide a kind of supportive framework where social workers can have those conversations in the workplace with the colleagues and the managers and others. So, having said that, good evening. I'm Andrew Fellows, and I'm the CPD Quality Assurance Manager at Social Work England. So, in the next part of the session, I'm going to share some insight about CPD from our first 3 years as a social work regulator. And in particular, what I'm going to do is highlight what's been recorded by social workers over the year since we changed the CPD requirements. And I'm also going to share some insight from our independent assessors on what social workers could think about when they're recording their CPD. So if we could have the next slide, Catherine. So the main headlines from our first 3 years as a regulator are that firstly, most of the CPD that's recorded is good. It demonstrates it's having a positive impact on practice. And as the social work regulator, this gives us confidence that social workers are maintaining their CPD and that they remain fit to practice. Secondly, as we'll see later in the slides, training is the most common type of CPD that's been recorded by social workers. However, the social workers are engaging in a very wide range and a very innovative range of CPD activities, as we'll see. Thirdly, the third point is that while many social workers record CPD throughout the year, and we'd most definitely encourage that, and we also see that most social workers record the minimum amount and leave recording to the end of the renewal period. Lots of social workers are actually actively engaging throughout the year in recording their CPD. And what I would say is that leaving recording CPD late can create unnecessary stress for social workers. and it can lead to potential difficulties with their registration at the end of the renewal period if they've not met all the renewal requirements. So I think it's a really important message that we've heard already about engaging the process during the year. Don't leave it till to the end of the registration period to avoid any potential problems for yourself. If I can move on to the next slide, Catherine. So during our first 2 years as regulator, when only one piece of CPD was required, what we saw was that social workers very impressively recorded over 200,000 pieces of 200,000 pieces of CPD each year. In December 2021, we changed the CPD requirements, and so social workers are now required to record at least 2 different pieces of CPD. And one of those does need to include a peer reflection. So during the last registration year, we saw, during 2021, I should say, over 220,000 pieces of CPD were recorded, and over 130,000 of these included a peer reflection. So what that meant was that on average, each social worker was recording 2.3 pieces of CPD during that registration period. So that's really impressive, and really pleased to see that level of engagement in the process. So on the next slide, you'll see from this slide that although CPD was recorded throughout the year, the vast majority was recorded during the registration renewal period, which runs from the 1st September to the 30th of November. And you can see that particularly it was recorded during the last month of the renewal period. Now, this is a pattern that we've seen over the 3 years of us being the regulator, and it is a pattern that does create some issues for some social workers who don't submit enough CPD, and they leave it right to the very end of the renewal period, and then we don't have an opportunity to let them know that they still have more to do. And what this means in practice is that they then fall off the register and they have to apply to restore the registration if they want to continue to practice as a social worker. You'll see on that graph as well that no CPD was recorded in December 2021, and there's a very good reason for that, and that's because the system had been turned off. We were moving from one set of requirements to another, so we turned the CPD recording system off for a month while we updated the online account to accommodate the changes that we were making. So on to the next slide, and as Joe mentioned, the CPD standard is one of the 6 professional standards for social workers in England. CPD is standard 4, and it's made up of 8 parts, which we've just been looking at as well with the presentation earlier, and that Vicky did. And when they record CPD, social workers tell us what parts of the CPD standard they've met through that piece of CPD. And for every piece of CPD that they record, they can select multiple parts of the CPD standard for each piece of CPD. Standards 4.6 and 4.7 are automatically met when a social worker records CPD. That's because they are the parts of the standard that are about reflecting on practice and recording CPD, so they aren't shown in the graph. But what you can see in the graph is that standard 4.5, which is about contributing to an open learning culture, was most often selected last year, and standard 4.1, which is about incorporating feedback from a range of sources, was a standard that was least selected. And we saw these parts of the standards earlier, but just to complete the picture, 4.2 is about using supervision and feedback to reflect and identify my learning needs. 4.3 is about keeping my practice up to date and using research, theories and frameworks to inform my practice. 4.4 is demonstrating good subject knowledge on key aspects of social work practice. And 4.8 is reflecting on my own values and challenging the impact they have on my practice. So we've got the full range of standards there, and you can see how many pieces of CPD were recorded that met those parts of the CPD standard. So moving on again. So last year, when we updated the online account, we introduced a new element to the form, which was a drop down. So for the first time, we asked social workers to tell us what type of CPD they'd done. So when they recorded a piece of CPD, they were given a drop down of options to select from. And as I mentioned already, training was easily the most common type selected, and that was followed by learning from a case and then on the job learning. And so by asking about a type of CPD, what we want to understand is what activities social workers are doing, but we also want to reinforce the message that CPD can be much broader than just formal training. And you'll see the graph on the next slide will show us a breakdown of the types. So you can see there the different types of CPD recorded. And you can see, interestingly, that almost 10% of social workers recorded CPD that was about self-directed learning, which is something we encourage. And that's the kind of thing where someone can read an article or listen to a podcast and so on. That kind of self-directed learning that lots of social workers do engage with. And that can be particularly helpful for people who aren't currently in practice as well. We did give an option of other, because we thought there's bound to be people want to put something different to what we've actually given them as options. So we did put other, and quite a lot of people did choose that option. So we're going to look at that in a bit more detail to try and understand what that 3% of records is, what they are, what these other things are, so we can kind of think about how we may retune the categories a little bit more in future years. So we kind of, give people options that are clear for them. So moving on to the next slide. Every year we randomly select 2.5% of social workers for a CPD review. Now, this is a review that we carry out to give us confidence that social workers are meeting the CPD requirements and engaging in CPD activity in a constructive and positive way. So the review is carried out by a team of independent assessors, and they look at the CPD that was recorded during the previous registration year. And the assessors are a mix of social workers and lay assessors who've got a background in social care and quality assurance. So for each social worker that we select, the assessors can give one of two outcomes. So they can either accept that CPD as meeting our requirements, or they give feedback. And the feedback is meant to be constructive and to help the social worker think about how to record their CPD in future. So the feedback will give the social worker details on how they can improve the CPD. And the other thing is that any social worker who's given feedback is then automatically selected for as part of the review in the following year. So for the first 2 years, the assessors look for evidence that the CPD was relevant to social work practice, and that the social worker demonstrated that it had a positive impact on their practice. But following the changes we made to the CPD requirements for this year, the assessors are looking at slightly different things. So they're still looking for evidence of impact, which is a key thing for us, but they're now also looking for evidence of peer reflection as well, to make sure that's taken place. And I think the really positive thing is that in the first 2 years of our regulation, approximately 95% of social workers had their CPD accepted by the assessors, so only 5% of social workers were given that feedback. This year's review is coming to an end in the next few days. We've not completed that yet, so I can't share any information on that at the moment. But what I can say is that based on what I know so far from the assessors, is that social workers are once again engaging in a really positive way with the CPD process, and we're getting some good feedback, getting some good results from the assessors. So moving on to my next slide then. So at the end of, I think actually it's my final slide, I think, at the end of the CPD review process, we get all the assessors together to discuss what they've learned from the review. So they've looked at 2,500 CPD records, or actually more than that. They've looked at the records of 2,500 social workers. So this is like 5,000 CPD records that they've looked at. And what they say to us is that they are consistently impressed by the work that social workers do, and they're very, very positive about the quality and range of CPD that's been recorded. They also give us some general advice on CPD that we want to share with social workers, and the findings from our discussions with the assessors last year are included in a blog that's on our website if you want to take a look afterwards. But I'll just go through some of the themes that have come out of the discussions with the assessors. So firstly, and not surprisingly, what the assessors tell us is that social workers need to focus on the impact of their CPD. What they say is that some of the records that they review don't show a clear link between the CPD activity that's being done and the impact it's having on social workers' practice. So an example might be a social worker's recorded some CPD about feedback that they've had from a person with lived and learned experience, but they then don't go on to tell us how that feedback's going to impact on their practice, what difference it's actually going to make to them in future. So evidencing impact is essential, really. It's an essential part of CPD. It's showing that your learning is effective and has had a positive impact and effect on the people that you're working with. So what the assessors suggest is that when you record CPD, you could ask yourselves various questions such as, how has the support you offer people changed or improved as a result of doing the CPD? If you're a manager, how has the CPD changed or improved your management style? How has it impacted on your staff and helped them deliver the best possible social work? And if you're not currently working, how do you think the CPD will impact the people you work with in the future when you do go back into social work, into the front line or whatever role that you've got? Secondly, the assessors give us some advice really to say that it's really good when social workers structure their CPD. So what they found is some really good examples of CPD use the STAR methodology, and they recommended that as one type of way of doing CPD in a structured way. There are other obviously models available to you, but if you aren't familiar with the STAR methodology, it has 4 steps. Firstly, you look at the situation. So when recording your CPD, you set the scene and the context of what you're doing. Secondly, the task is to describe the challenge and what your role was. So what did you need to do and why? Thirdly is about action. So explain what you did to achieve your goal and how you did it. And then finally, focus on results, share the outcome. How did that impact on your practice? So that's kind of one suggestion of a methodology to use to kind of put together a really structured CPD. The assessors also recommended social workers start early with their CPD. What they said was that they often noticed that when the social worker had rushed their CPD, it wasn't of good quality. The better quality CPD was often recorded earlier and in good time, well ahead of the deadline. And because doing that recording earlier allows a social worker to go back and read what they've written and take time to reflect properly. And then talking of rushing, what they also notice is that many records did contain spelling and grammatical errors if they've been rushed. Now, the assessors do not assess the CPD on the spelling and grammar. That's not what they're looking at all. But poorly written records can be difficult to understand. So taking time to proofread your CPD before submitting it does ensure the assessors can understand what you've written. It also shows that you're taking care when recording your CPD. And my final point, and the final point from the assessors, is that they highlighted that you can use CPD to reflect on well-being, which I think was mentioned by Vicky earlier, actually. They said that some social workers had used CPD to reflect on their mental and emotional well-being, and that was often quite powerful CPD. Social workers gave examples of personal support they needed to manage their work and reflecting on anxieties they were experiencing, for example, following the COVID-19 pandemic. So what they said was that CPD recording can be used as a tool to reflect on your experiences and identify what support you might need. So there's quite a lot to reflect on there. As I say, there is actually a blog on our website that you can look at, which goes into a bit more detail on what I've just covered there. And some of the data that I've mentioned this evening as well is included in the Social Work in England report, which we've just published. So that's my part. I'm now going to hand back to Catherine. I think it's going to pass us on.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Andrew. And some of the things that are really resonated, I think, with what Vicky was saying about health and well-being, and her trying to get people the social workers in Stockton to record all through the year and not leave it to the last minute, because those statistics are quite something in terms of renewals in November.